What up, mother chuggers? So, after going through probably about 3 weeks of back and forth using different cabinets, I ended up picking up a Mesa Compact. Now, first and foremost, on the Mesa Compact cabs in particular, I have found that they're pretty rare. Like, they're tough to find. And the big thing that kind of swayed me to this over the standard full size, that they call it the 212 FB, is mainly just portability. You know, I mean, the full size 212 cabs, they're like close to 60 pounds, about the same as an EVH 212 cab. And to me, that's insanely heavy for something that has only one handle at the top as opposed to having like two handles on the sides. So anyway, the other thing about me, the reason why I wanted to do this video isn't just to showcase the cabinet as a whole, but also talk about how things have changed in terms of how people view music equipment, especially nowadays, where, even, not just nowadays, but, even back, 10, 15 years ago, as highly rated Mesa was and is, I guess, they're kind of overpriced for what they are. Really, honestly, they're kind of overpriced. So I'm kind of want to talk about why you would buy a Mesa, what kind of Mesa cab you should go for, and if it's really worth the money compared to all the other options out there. And I'll go through a few quick, sound samples here, and I will get down to mainly the real big bullet points that I think are going to help anyone that's considering a Mesa 212 or just shopping around for a 212. And without going too depth into it, too heavy, I'm just going to go straight to a few sound samples. I got the Joyle Zombie hooked up. It's really my go-to at home in the home studio when I'm doing videos, because for you guys that have already heard the Zombie through various other cabs that I've had, this should give you a better idea of how it sounds, as opposed to me using different amps with different cabs, so you don't really get an accurate difference between all of them. Okay, so I'm trying to not ramble too much here. Let's see if I can set a good volume without blowing anyone's, blowing anyone's speakers, blowing anyone's eardrums. Best I can. Okay, super short, super simple. Not a whole hell of a lot of difference when you're talking about clean tones. The only difference might be a slight variation in resonance compared to other 212 cabs that are, let's say, even have similar speakers but are bigger, right? So resonance is going to be, I think, the biggest factor. I think the biggest factor overall is going to be resonance, because it's the compact model. I don't know if it's apparently visible at the bottom of the cab, but I actually put in 3-inch casters on the bottom. They're blue. I don't know if that matters. I think it looks kind of funny, but at the same time looks kind of cool, and it elevates the cab off the floor 3 inches, which is kind of what I was looking for. I wanted something to get it be a little higher off the ground. That way, being a compact, it kind of makes up for it. I don't know. But anyway, that was my thought process there. Okay, so we heard the clean. Let's just go straight to high gain. I'm going to hit the vintage overdrive on for the boost. Drive at 0, volume all the way up. Tone is about halfway. Just to point out, I am using a 6-band EQ in the loop. The only thing I'm using it for, though, is I have the 100 and 200 hertz just lowered slightly, just to even out the bass response with the rest of the EQ. Everything else is set dead center. So take that for what it's worth. But obviously, without a 3-band EQ, it's very tough to get that sound that you're really looking for. So okay, yeah, here we go. So boost on, noise gate, no effects. Okay, so thoughts. I'm going to compare this to, I think I'm going to compare this to the Hughes and Kettner TM212 that I have sitting at the other studio. So although this is the compact model, this is still a few pounds heavier. I want to say like 7 or 8 pounds heavier than my Hughes and Kettner 212, which is technically falls in line with what you would call a full-size 212. The biggest. Let's go through the pros real quick. So even though it's heavier, it's arguably more solid construction. So that's a huge pro. That's a huge plus. The speakers are huge, just for sound in general. But if you don't have the right cab, sometimes it might not matter as much. That being said, these are UK made Celestion Vintage 30s in here. And yes, I checked. And the quality materials that are used in the UK are Okay, just to point this out, this has actually been proven. I'm not just talking out of my ass. The Celestion V30s made in the UK, the materials that they use to make the speaker are technically a little better quality than the Chinese made ones. That's a fact. It's been proven. You're talking about the difference between, certain nickel alloys as opposed to, other steel alloys. One magnet might have a little more magnesium in its overall design than the other. And sometimes that can translate to certain voltage handling requirements. I'm not going to get too far in depth with it, but basically, I was running my 15 watt PRS MT15 through my H&K cab. It's rated for 120 watts, and I blew a speaker right in mid rehearsal. And and I talked to a couple other speaker designers, speaker brands, and they say it's a common thing. They say it's a common thing for Chinese made speakers to have an issue where they just suddenly can't handle the voltage anymore, even though at the time I was putting way less voltage into it than what it was rated for. Anyway, aside from the quality differences, the sound difference is apparent. What I've already mentioned is the resonance isn't as deep in the compact Mesa as it is the Hughes and Kettner. And that's to be expected. That's not even a con or a pro and con between the two. It's just, that's physics. You can't ignore it. And if you have an amp that has a resonance control as well as at least a 3-band EQ, you'll be able to adjust it to the point where you wouldn't notice much of a difference. Okay, so I mean that's really it. I mean the UK made speakers, the V30s made in the UK, they have that a little more of a mid-range spike to them as opposed to the ones made in China. So the Chinese made V30s, they sound okay. They're nothing. There's nothing really wrong with the sound. They just don't have the mid spike that the UK made V30s have. And make sure I'm not twisting my own words up. That just comes down to what kind of amp you have too. If you have a bright amp, then using Chinese made vintage 30s, if they're brand new, I wouldn't have any concern about it. That's your best bet. So if you have a bright amp, you want to go with probably more of the Hughes and Kettner side, or Engel. Engel, their speakers are made in China too. Darker amps, or let's say like slightly more towards the darker spectrum, that's where the Mesa, or at least the UK made vintage 30s shine a little better. No pun intended. Pricing. Okay, so pricing is, it depends on the person, but let me give you an example. For a brand new Hughes and Kettner TM212, it is $700. Okay, for one of these brand new, it's over $900. Okay, so this leads me to the foundation of recommendations, is that if you can find one of these for used, if you find one of these used for a good deal, let's say like under $800, right? Let's say like under $800, absolutely worth it, 100%. And that's assuming it's in great condition. That's assuming it's not beat all the shit and the speakers aren't, close to tearing or blowing, or the wiring's not all jacked up. Then yeah, I'd say 800 or less. A used one of these is 100% worth it. However, if you're comparing the brand new versus brand new, one of these versus the Hughes and Kettner, yes, I would prefer having UK made vintage 30s, but for the price of a brand new Hughes and Kettner at $700, why would you bother with a Mesa? Why? Why would you spend $200, $250, $300 plus more on a Mesa cab, because yes, they are made in the USA, which is fantastic. I'm never going to knock something that's made in the USA, but you also got to understand that you got to put budgeting in mind too. That has to be a factor, because most of us musicians, we're not, at least the most of us musicians that can actually play, we're usually on some sort of budget here. And then you've got, I know, some guys, they have 16 guitars hanging up on their walls, and they don't know how to play any of them. But yet, for whatever reason, they seem to have almost unlimited funds to buy whatever. I don't know. It's weird how that works. Anyway, overall, great cab. No complaints. This is primarily my home studio / gigging setup now. So my rehearsal setup is the Hughes & Kettner with my PRS MT15 at the main studio. It stays there. This one, everything else you see here is either for home use, stage, or recording backup. Not necessarily in that order. So yeah, guys, I mean, if you have any questions, I mean, there wasn't much else to tell about it. It's a Mesa cab, you can always read the specs online. I'm not going to sit here and bore you with it. But overall, I think it's a good cab. I think a used one for under $800 is a fantastic deal if it's in great condition. If you can't find one, then just buy a new H&K. Honestly, there's no reason to worry about not having a Mesa. Great cab, but are they still a little overhyped for the price? Yes, I think they are. But let you try one out. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. And that's really what it comes down to. Just before I end stuff, let me see if I can get a good view for you guys of the casters that I just put on this thing. It's kind of funny. It really sits high for sure. Yeah, there you go. Yep, nice blue 3-inch casters. I like them. I got them off Amazon, but overall, they're I chose the bigger wheels mainly because it's easier to roll over objects and get from the hard floor to a carpet or whatever the case might be. If you're out gigging and moving the thing a lot, yeah, it's not so heavy you can't carry it, but still, if you can roll it, all the better, right? All right, guys, let me know if you have any questions.